We have brand new information as the mystery continues into the deaths of a mom and her two 6-year-old children inside their massive rural Arkansas home. A major development that has caught our attention. The local sheriff's office says the Secret Service and Department of Homeland Security are now involved in this case. Charity Beallis and the kids were found shot dead in the home a day after a final and brutal divorce hearing took place. It involved the custody of the kids and her ex-husband, a doctor who previously had pleaded guilty to domestic violence. And it reportedly turns out that this is not the first time that a wife of this doctor was found shot dead. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey, real quick, it is open enrollment again for many of you, and comparing the premiums, fine print of health insurance, it's not fun. It can be chaos. Crowd Health is different. It's members like you funding each other's bills directly. If something big happens, you pay the first $500, the crowd funds the rest. They have a track record of handling major events, including bills over $1 million, giving you confidence. Plus, you get access to low-cost prescriptions, testing, and high-quality doctors. With ACA subsidies expiring, premiums could skyrocket, and so far, members have saved over $40 million. This open enrollment, take your power back. Join Crowd Health to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months using code ONTHECASE at joincrowdhealth.com. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out. This is how we win. Join crowdhealth.com. We have some shocking new information that has come in a bizarre death mystery that we're covering out of Arkansas. The first part. The Daily Mail is reporting that this is not the first time that a wife of Dr. Randall Beallis has been found dead from a gunshot wound. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. And we also have learned that the U.S. Secret Service and Department of Homeland Security are now involved in this investigation. You might be asking yourself, we certainly are, what do those agencies have to do with figuring out if the deaths of Charity Beallis and her two kids are murders? We're going to talk about that in just a moment as well. But first, I want to break down some of the new pieces of information we have involving this investigation and a family that appears to have been ripped apart first by domestic violence, then by divorce, and now by death. Here's a picture of Charity. She was 40 years old, and she is in this picture with who we believe are her children, twins, a boy and a girl. They were roughly 6 years old. They lived in the tiny town of Bonanza, Arkansas. It's a small place right along the Oklahoma border. Population 575, so not very big. It's somewhat close to Fort Smith, Arkansas, which is more of a city in that part of the country. Now, this is where Charity lived. A massive 4-bedroom house down a secluded rural road. Zillow says this home is worth roughly $800,000. That is nearly 4 times the amount of the average home price in that town. Now, at the time of her death, Charity was near the end of a brutal divorce case involving her ex-husband, a local doctor, his name Randall or Randy Beallis. We found a health website that says that he had served the community as a family doctor for more than 25 years. But this is a picture that shows him in a much different light. It's a picture of Dr. Beallis from his arrest back in February. And this picture has gone somewhat viral when talking about this case because his wife and kids are now dead. This mugshot is from his arrest in February of this year when he was accused of choking Charity in front of their kids at their home. Charity filed for divorce in the days after that incident, and the two have been in a legal dispute for months leading up to Charity's death and, of course, the death of those 6-year-old kids. Now, we do want to note before we move forward that at the time of this recording, the cause of death for Charity, the causes of death for her children, they have not been determined. And Dr. Beallis has not been named a suspect, nor has any arrest been made in connection to these deaths. Now, his lawyer is saying that Dr. Beallis is innocent. We will show you what his lawyer is reportedly saying in just a moment, as this case is getting a ton of attention and it's triggering a ton of speculation. Now, here's the information that we have in from the local sheriff's office laying out what they know at this point about the death of Charity and the kids. Now, police say on December 3rd, they were called to the Beallis home in Bonanza. It was around 9:30 in the morning. Dr. Beallis was not living in this house at the time of his wife and kids' death because there was a no contact order that was in place related to that domestic abuse case. The call was a welfare check. Sebastian County Sheriff's Office deputies say there were 2 workers on the property that allowed them to get into the home, and once they were inside, they made a terrible and horrific discovery. They found Charity. She was dead, and so were those two 6-year-old children. All 3 of them, according to authorities, had been shot. Now, it's still unclear if deputies believe that those gunshots were fired by someone who came into the home, or is this a case of Charity harming herself and harming the kids? We don't know. As of yet, deputies say the Arkansas Crime Lab is still working to figure that out. Some more new information we have in from the sheriff's office is that they say 12 search warrants are being processed in this case. 6 of them have already been served, and they may need more search warrants to gather evidence. They also say that numerous interviews have taken place and that they're following up on countless tips that have come in from the community, and that more interviews could happen. Again, we still don't know the manner or cause of death of Charity and her children, and preliminary results are still pending when it comes to an autopsy, and the authorities say test results on other evidence gathered at the home, and in this case, the results there still pending as well. There's so much with that we still don't know at this point, but there was certainly a bombshell released in the statement from the local sheriff's office. And it's that not just the local authorities are looking into Charity's death, but they're getting help from the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Secret Service, federal agencies. Why is that? We're still trying to figure that out. We're going to look into it in just a moment. But here's what we know about the Beallis' divorce and why it's important to this investigation. Now, the day before Charity and the kids were found dead in the home, the Beallises had their final hearing on their divorce. 5 News, which is a local television station in Arkansas, is reporting that Dr. Beallis' lawyer says that Dr. Randy Beallis was awarded joint custody of the children during that hearing on December 2nd, and it happened just a day before Charity and the kids were found dead. Now, as far as what legal documents tell us, in February, it seems that an incident put this couple on a path to divorce. Dr. Randall Beallis was arrested on charges of domestic battering purposely and 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a minor in the 3rd degree, as well as a count of aggravated assault on a family or household member by choking. According to court records, the doctor allegedly choked Charity in front of their kids. He pleaded guilty to domestic battery in the 3rd degree on October 6th of this year. Now, it doesn't appear that he was sentenced to prison time, but he was fined $1,500 and he was ordered to not have contact with Charity, and he could only have contact with their children with court approval. Now, this wasn't the first time that the marriage of the Beallises seemed toxic.
Give me your phone. I'm shutting it off.
Here goes the next one. Yeah. What are you gonna do? It's called being the parent, buddy. My truck in my name. Yep. I paid for it.
Give me that phone.
This is a video clip that has now gone viral. It's on Facebook. It was posted in 2020, and it reportedly shows Charity and Dr. Beallis in a confrontation with a man, and that man goes on Facebook by the name of Lonnie Mitz. That's who posted that video. And the poster writes, quote, "This is Dr. Randall Scott Beallis and his wife Charity disciplining her son for not returning a text as soon as they thought he should. They appear in court in the morning to decide custody of the 17-year-old and the 2 babies seen in the video. Please share this, as those 2 shouldn't be in charge of a pet, much less children." Now, Charity had a now 25-year-old son. He was 17 at the time of that video. And on May 20th, not long after that video was posted, Charity's then 17-year-old son filed this emancipation document. He was asking to get the rights of an adult. He was going to turn 18 a couple months after this incident. Now, in the request, he states, quote, that on the 14th day of May 2020, that Charity Beallis and Randy Beallis did take a knife or ice pick and slashed and ruined the tires of John Randall Powell's 2005 Ford F-150 vehicle, that he bought the vehicle and the same is titled in his name. That John Randall Powell has a video of Charity Beallis and Randy Beallis doing the same. The request was approved in June 2020. Now, this does not appear to have any connection to what happened more than 5 years later, where Charity is now dead and so are her kids, but it does give you a glimpse into this couple and potentially how toxic their marriage was. Charity's son is now 25 years old, and he told 5 News in Arkansas, quote, "I'm glad they have looked into it and are taking the time to pursue this case and bring justice for what has happened," in speaking about the federal government now being involved in some capacity in this investigation. He said that on December 9th, and he said, quote, "I'm very, very grateful and appreciative." So let's now talk about a previous wife of Dr. Randall Beallis. This is a picture of Shauna Beallis. She died in 2012 at the age of 34, and according to the Daily Mail, police said that she took her own life with a gun. Now, we found her obituary, and it describes her as someone who had a fun living life, and it does list Dr. Randy Beallis as one of the people that she was survived by. The Daily Mail claims that family members of Shauna have suspected that she didn't die by suicide and that someone killed her, and potentially they believe Randy could be involved. They say that Shauna just had too much to live for. It's important to note that this was never a murder investigation to our knowledge, that again, this has been ruled a suicide per the Daily Mail, and Dr. Beallis was never charged in that case. And I want to make it clear that those family claims are not backed up by any law enforcement investigation to our knowledge. Now, here is what we know about what Dr. Beallis' attorney has said amidst the death of Charity and the kids. His attorney told the New York Post, quote, "Mr. Beallis was not responsible for the death of Mrs. Beallis nor his children's deaths." He went on to say, quote, "Mr. Beallis has been cooperative with law enforcement and fully supports the Sebastian County Sheriff's Office investigation. We hope that the Sheriff's Office finds the truth about what happened to Mrs. Charity Beallis and their children." He also reportedly said that Dr. Beallis gave a voluntary interview and allowed access to anything law enforcement requested. The lawyer also told the New York Post that Dr. Beallis was going to be on a schedule where he would get the kids for 2 weeks at a time, and then Charity would get the kids for 1 week at a time. He claims the children and Charity died before Dr. Beallis could get his children back, which was supposed to happen on Friday the 5th. The lawyer said that Dr. Beallis is, quote, "heartbroken." Now, another layer to this story is that Charity had reached out to a state lawmaker concerned about her safety. Arkansas State Senator Terry Rice told 5 News that Charity did in fact reach out for help to get protection earlier this year. Now, we don't know what the autopsy will find and whether police believe that this is a case where Charity turned the weapon on herself and the kids as she was going to have to share custody with her husband, or if this is something involving another person who entered the home from the outside. Join us now to talk a little bit more about this and what this investigation could look like is Sergeant John Rappa, former homicide detective with Advanced Police Concepts. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to be with us. One big question for me on this is I hear Homeland Security, I hear Secret Service. We're dealing with a case in rural Arkansas. What would be potentially a reason that those agencies would get involved?
You know, that's a really good question. And a lot of this is just speculation. But normally when Homeland Security gets involved, we equate that to human trafficking or smuggling or immigration violations or weapons violations and things of that nature. And of course, with the Secret Service, we're talking, other types of investigations. But oftentimes, if it doesn't, and again, speculation, if it doesn't cross federal lines, because they're not there for the murder, that's going to be the local agency, the murder investigation. But I know that the Secret Service has an electronic crimes task force, and they work with local agencies as well. I don't know if this agency is part of that task force, but oftentimes they have better electronics forensics lab, if you will. They have high-end equipment, things that local agencies might not have. So if you're talking about cell phone extraction, computer extraction, and things of that nature, I could see why they would enlist the help of a bigger agency, especially the Secret Service, when they have this electronic task force.
And with this case, I mean, it's, whatever the outcome is, I mean, it's incredibly tragic because you have 2 children, of course, 6 years old, losing their life. Their mom has died. There was this terrible divorce proceeding back and forth. Right now, the big question is, like, how did they end up shot? We know that they were shot dead, but how did it happen? Is this something that's a murder, or is this a case where someone, potentially the mom, we know that she had a tough ruling reportedly in a custody hearing just the day before. Was this something where she hurt the kids and hurt herself? As a former homicide detective, you come on scene, you take in, and we weren't there in the room to know exactly what it looked like, but what are some of the things you're looking for that help you determine whether this was done by somebody on the outside or the inside?
That's a good question. And obviously, one of the things that I was big on and I was taught and I learned and I practiced was you treat any death investigation like a homicide until you rule out that it's not a homicide. Even a suicide, if you feel something is a suicide, you still have to treat it like it's a homicide. So one of the first things I'm looking for to see if there was an outside intruder is obviously a forced entry and things of that nature. Now, in the instance of this, and again, this is speculation, we don't know what happened. The agency is doing, in my opinion, a very good job at keeping their cards to their chest. Sometimes that's important, so we don't know. But let's say hypothetically it was somebody like the husband, like Mr. Beallis. He's going to have a key to the apartment or to the house, right? He's going to be able to get inside. So, the forced entry might not be there. But there's other things that we're looking for. One of the first things that I'm going to look for when I find somebody with a gunshot wound, that type of death, if I suspect it could be suicide, I want to get gunshot residue as quick as I can, a GSR kit. And basically what that is, anytime you fire a weapon, it expels gunpowder. And gunpowder is going to be on the hand, in the immediate area of the hand, and of course around the forearm area, anytime somebody shoots a gun. So if it's staged to look like a suicide, we're going to look at that. And if there's no GSR, that's one indicator that it might be a homicide rather than a suicide. The other thing I want to look at almost immediately is for stippling. And basically what stippling is, it's a peppered pattern of unburned or partially burned gunpowder that usually embeds in the skin. So if I fire a weapon, the stippling, the gunpowder is going to embed in the skin. And the further back I am, there's going to be no stippling. The closer I am, the closer the group of the stippling, if you will. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for. And so if somebody claimed, let's say hypothetically, somebody claimed that they shot somebody from 8 feet away, it was a self-defense, and this is just one example, it was a self-defense crime, and I shot him from 8 feet away because he was coming at me, but there's stippling around the gunshot wound, that's indicative of being close to the victim, right, or to the person that was shot. So one of the things I'm looking for is the stippling. Does she have stippling, right? Was it a close contact shot, or was it a shot from a faraway angle, right? That's what I'm looking for to help me immediately determine whether it could be a suicide. Doesn't necessarily mean that it was, but it's got to help me kind of start to develop my my theory around the facts of the case.
Because this, her body was discovered, the bodies were discovered on December 3rd, so it's been a week since this discovery was made. And, from the outside, you only know what law enforcement is releasing. And we don't know whether it's one or the other. Is this a murder-suicide, or is this something that was done by a person on the outside? I mean, how, and this is just me who just, takes in whatever police are telling us. I mean, you're the one who does these investigations. How obvious is it if this was a murder-suicide? Is that something that they would potentially release by now if that's what they were dealing with?
So that is a really good question. And so I'll tell you, one of the things that drives me crazy is when departments release, and it's bad for us, it's bad for the media, it's bad for stories like this, right? But one of the things that really drives me crazy, especially when I worked in homicide, is I didn't want to release details of the case. I wanted to hold that to my chest. And one of the reasons why I think that's important is I don't want the suspect to know what I know. I don't want those details to get out there, because if it's not a suicide and I am looking into somebody specifically, I don't want them to know that about the GSR or the stippling that we just talked about, or that I downloaded the phones and I've went through their social media profiles and I'm looking at arguments and things of that nature. I don't want anybody to know that just yet, right? I want to save that to if I get to interview the suspect and so forth. So I think it's extremely important sometimes to hold that to your chest, and that might be a reason why they're not releasing some of that information.
Because also, there's always, there's been several cases in the past where there's a debate over, if it was ruled a suicide, you'll have family members saying that it wasn't, and there's this back and forth. In a case like this involving a gunshot, I guess how difficult is it for somebody if they actually wanted to cover it up? And I'm not saying that is happening here, but with everything that goes into determining from the gunshot residue to the angles to how close a gunshot was fired, I mean, how difficult is it potentially for someone to make it seem like a suicide when it wasn't? So I took a class many years ago on staged suicides, and it was very eye-opening. And one of the things that I learned was
the theory of, does the story match the evidence? When you're trying to determine whether it's a staged suicide or if it's a homicide, does the story match the evidence? And what's the story? The story is, obviously if there's witnesses, right, you're going to get a story. If the victim is still, you're still going to get a story, right? But what else is the story? The story is all the evidence involved. It is stippling, it's the GSR, it's the forensics evidence that we're looking at, the tower dumps, right? Was there forced entry? We're looking, does the story match the evidence? Is this a suicide? And in my opinion, in my experience, more often than not, on the initial, when we first walk into a crime scene, it could look like a suicide. It screams suicide. But as we start to uncover details, pretty quickly we can determine whether it's a staged suicide or not. But you always have to go in with that mindset. Does the story match the evidence? We have the evidence. We have the entry of that, whether there's forced entry, whether you're looking at the forensics log, you're looking at, social media logs, text messages between a victim and a possible suspect, right? These are all the stories. And then you obviously look at the crime scene. Do they match? And we can tell fairly quickly, not in every case. Some cases, they get away from us. It is what it is. But fairly quickly, in my experience, in most cases, you can tell fairly quickly if it's going to be a suicide or a homicide.
Now, Dr. Randy Beallis, he's not a suspect in this case, hasn't been charged, hasn't been arrested. We don't know if we're even dealing with a murder in this case, but because of his history, and he pleads guilty to a domestic violence charge in October, he's in this divorce hearing, his name comes into the discussion surrounding this story. His attorney, though, says, his attorney says that he has nothing to do with it, that he's voluntarily given an interview to police, that he has turned over everything that they've asked at this point. What would you say is, I guess, cooperate? When I know when an attorney says my client is fully cooperating, that can be very different from what a detective sees as fully cooperating. Right. What do you expect from someone maybe in his position at this point that you would see as full cooperation?
Sure. When you lose a loved one, and I know that they were going through a divorce, and sometimes divorces can be ugly, and it seemed like they had some problems. But when you're going through when you lose a loved one, at one point they loved each other. They're still, and especially the children, right? So when you lose somebody close to you, your ex-wife, your children, a natural reaction is going to be cooperative. So for me, that's submitting to all the interviews, having, the interviews with the police officers, with the detectives, letting them know what you know. Of course, giving up your phone, giving up the cellular forensics. Just any time the police ask for something to help further their investigation, somebody who is truly cooperative is going to provide that information for the police. It's probably the same thing as a defense attorney would feel that is cooperating for the most part. But that also includes the interview.
Yeah, and certainly we don't know how. We know he voluntarily gave an interview, but how did the interview go? How did he answer questions? We haven't heard from law enforcement's side of it. We also don't know if he has an alibi, or his attorney hasn't said he was at location X, for this period of time. And maybe that information comes to light. Generally, what's the bar when someone says they were somewhere? How do you prove that typically when it comes to an alibi and making sure that it's rock solid?
It's fairly easy today. I always say I don't know how cops solved crime in the 80s. It was very hard. They had to get out there and actually do police work. And we do police work, don't get me wrong. But there's so much technology available to us. We're talking about your cell phone data. Your cell phone always tells the tale. It always tells you where you're at. It always says, your location. So we're looking at that. We're looking at most towns and cities across the country have automatic license plate readers. And to me, that's important as well. We can follow most folks. Once we, develop a suspect, we can find out where they were just by sometimes plugging their tag into the automatic license plate readers. So all of these things. And then, of course, obviously, if they have an alibi, we're going to go check up and follow up on that alibi as soon as possible. And we'll try to prove or disprove that alibi. The more we talk to people, whether it's victims or witnesses, the more somebody talks to us and we have evidence. If they're lying, their story starts to fall apart, rather quickly. And then that person starts to become more of a suspect. And of course, with Dr. Beallis' history, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that here in a second, and again, speculation. I'm not saying he did anything. I don't know. The department has not released anything. But surely he's going to be a suspect, especially for the fact that I believe the divorce was finalized the day before she was killed. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it was the day before. So she is found December 3rd, she and the kids inside the house in the morning after like a welfare call. And we don't know who was the original person to call in and say, hey, can you go check on this house? But they have this final divorce proceeding on December 2nd. And then according to his lawyer, who told the New York Post that Dr. Beallis was awarded 2 weeks with the kids. She was awarded 1 week with the kids, which I did find interesting just because of his history. And it was just in October that he pleaded guilty to a domestic violence charge, that he was the one to get 2 weeks and she was to get 1 week if that was to check out. We don't know if, at the end of the day, what the motive could have been for whatever happened in the home.
Absolutely.
How often have you seen, because this happened, I mean, the day after, having a what sounds like an emotional type of hearing, do you see this type of violence, I mean, within the hours or day after something like a divorce becomes final?
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't necessarily lead to homicide. I've worked a couple of cases like that, absolutely. But generally, I've seen domestic violence escalate because one person is mad that the court case didn't go their way. And I see that all the time. We see the violation of the restraining orders and so forth. So that's a very common thing. That's why when I read this initially, and I'm sure, even the detectives working the case, it's, they're always going to look at the husband, the ex-husband, but in something like this, you're looking at what happened on December 2nd and what happened on December 3rd, and it screams, we've got to look into this person.
And again, we don't know if he has an alibi that's rock solid, and police have already said, hey, he's not a suspect. We'll see what more information they release. I think they're just in this holding pattern to see whether, information comes back on this being, a murder-suicide or a murder that happened on the outside. But as they're in this holding pattern, just what stands out to you about Dr. Beallis? I mean, he has this history, and I see why, his name's been brought in, but he hasn't been accused of anything yet. You have what seemed like a very, very scary situation where he allegedly tried to strangle his wife, Charity, in front of their 2 kids back in February.
I think domestic violence is always a bad thing. When you have a history of domestic, it's happened before. And from what I understand, I don't know this to be true. I've read some articles on this case. This has happened. At least she had alleged that this case of the strangulation was not the first. There had been other accusations from what I understand. And correct me if I'm wrong. But I think when domestic violence leads to the level of strangulation, there's danger there. That's far beyond pushing somebody or hitting somebody, which is still wrong. But that strangulation, you could absolutely kill somebody that way. And you're taking that to the next level. So it's a very unfortunate situation, but you could see how volatile it got over the years.
It was absolutely a toxic marriage. We'll see if that played into, sadly, what happened. These 2 kids are dead, and Charity Beallis she is dead as well. Sergeant John Rappa from Advanced Police Concepts, former homicide detective. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.